just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it!
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Thailand Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. How's it going, everybody? I've got some pretty exciting news. If you listen to the podcast much, you know we've been building a pretty vibrant community of truly extraordinary people who have committed to an unconventional route through life. The Successful Dropout audience has been growing a lot, and I get a lot of people reaching out to me now with all sorts of questions regarding education, dropping out, opting out, entrepreneurship, resources, networking, etc. So much so that I decided it was time to create a more accessible community on Facebook so that we can all ask and answer these kinds of questions together, as well as celebrate our successes and encourage each other during inevitable adversity. So I've created a closed Facebook group, and I want to invite you to join it. If you follow Successful Dropout, if you resonate with our philosophy and want to help me grow this thriving community, go to successfuldropout.com/group. This community is for the rebels, the outliers, the innovators, the doers, and those who dare to dream and act on their dreams. If you're a dropout, an opt-out, if you're thinking about doing one of those things, if you're a parent, even if you aren't any of those things and you graduated school, I want to invite you to join. All that matters is that you resonate with the Successful Dropout philosophy and that you enter the group with the intention to provide value to the other members and not just receive value yourself. Again, go to successfuldropout.com/group to request admission. Once you're a part of the group, introduce yourself and get involved, and I'll see you there. What is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Steve Patterson. Steve is a philosopher and author working outside of academia. Imagine that. That's possible. He is also the host of the Patterson in Pursuit podcast, where he's been traveling the world interviewing intellectuals from various backgrounds on different topics. He's spoken with everybody from professors at Harvard to Buddhist monks in Thailand and Japan. His work covers a range of topics from epistemology and metaphysics to the to the philosophy of mathematics, politics, and economics. So, Steve, that is the intro I have for you, man. But tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So, I think that covers the 10,000-foot view. One interesting detail is this. I like to call this like intellectual entrepreneurship. It's kind of a new area, being an independent researcher and scholar. It started way back in the day, like 20 years ago, because I was homeschooled. So I'm one of those weird homeschool kids that had to learn the process of self-study way back in the day, and that's just kind of carried through to what I'm doing now. For better or worse, I'm not technically a dropout, so I'm an imposter on the show. I have my useless and worthless bachelor's degree in political science that I got, and so when I was in college, that self-study was still there, and it actually kind of caused me a lot of frustration because I had a very underwhelming college experience that kind of jaded me to academia. I lost my faith in the academic system because I was doing my own research, but in the long run, I think it's worked out where even though I lost faith in the academy, now I feel like I'm in the process of carving out kind of a new career path for people who are really interested in the world of ideas, but maybe don't have the kind of psychological disposition that it takes to go into the academy.
I gotcha. So I'm right with you on the homeschooling thing. I was homeschooled for the majority of my life, and luckily, at least according to my friends, hopefully they're not lying to me, I turned out all right. I'm still feel like I'm a pretty cool guy, not one of those the awkward homeschooler stigma that's out there. So you're in good company, is what I'm saying.
Well, I am one of those awkward homeschoolers, so
yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay, you earned a degree in, what was it again?
Political science.
Political science. And then I noticed you said you like to study the philosophy of politics and economics and stuff. So I guess I'm curious, why specifically is that degree useless? You said it was useless to you. I guess why? I guess in relation to what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, in general, it's useless on many fronts. It's useless from one perspective because the ideas that I learned were shallow. The actual curriculum was poor, and I learned far more by teaching myself about politics and economics than I did in college, no doubt. But it's also useless in the sense that a political science degree doesn't do much for you unless you want to live really in DC, or unless you have some weird job in which they require a bachelor's degree of any sort. It's not very practical. I graduated from college without almost any practical skills. My professor said that I could write well, but I found that very weird. And now I think I can write well, but at the time I couldn't. And years ago, I wrote an article on this. It's called My Bachelor's Degree Means Nothing. And I discovered why my professors thought that I wrote well. It's because they were grading my writing in relation to everybody else that was in class. And in that context, my writing was great. But that's only because all of my peers, all of the fellow students were terrible writers. So
right.
That's why I would say it's not just my circumstance with having a useless political science degree. I think in general, most people that graduate from college with a poli-sci degree don't really put it to use. I did spend some time working in DC for nonprofits that were in kind of the political world, so maybe it helped me then, but since then it really hasn't done anything for me.
Did you, well, first I want to say, so you, this was before the intro and we launched the interview here, but you'd mentioned that you knew Isaac Morehouse, or you know him. Something you said is very familiar to something I've heard him say, which is that he was sitting in a classroom once and just sort of had this epiphany that all of a sudden he was looking around him and realizing, like, I am roughly going to be the average of all these people in this room if I stay in this environment and progress and learn at this rate. And it's like, that's such a, I mean, if you guys are listening and you're still, going to classrooms, and I'd encourage you to just do that as sort of a mental exercise, just to think to yourself, if I continue to progress in this particular pipeline and I don't try to get off the conveyor belt at all, I'm roughly going to be the average or maybe above average. You could even say I'm going to be the best out of everybody in this room. And like, is that really, like, how good is that? Is that actually? It might be a more humbling experience than you want.
Right, and there's a lot of depth to that. In fact, I say I lost faith in the academy, and that's a good use of words. I really lost faith.
Yeah.
Because when I was there and I engaged with professors and I engaged with students, I had kind of an epiphany realization that the students that were there, the straight A students that didn't have a clue what they were talking about, had not dug into the world of ideas outside of the textbooks, which means they essentially had no knowledge. They were the best students, and they were going to be professors of the next generation. And so I thought, oh, this explains why so many of the professors, like 99% of the professors that I'm talking with, are clueless. It's because they're these people. They were these students 30 years ago. So then I'm thinking, hang on. So I'm in this room listening to people talk. I know for a fact that the professor knows less about this subject matter than I do, because I talked to them, and they've essentially said that they're clueless about the alternative ways of thinking about political theory or alternative ways of thinking about economics. Totally unaware of the ideas that I was engaging with. I'm supposed to be listening to them and treating them as if I were learning from them. And the next generation of people is going to be listening to the people sitting next to me who are, not exactly, let's say, professor material in the way that I thought professors were. So that was kind of a disheartening moment, because I thought that the academy was going to be filled with people who were really pursuing the truth and really grappling with ideas from lots of different perspectives, and it's just not the case. And one more thing I'll say on that, it's kind of sad. So after graduating, I got to work in the nonprofit world that was tied to academia, because it was still working in the world of ideas. And then since then, as I've literally been traveling the world, I still go to universities to talk to professors, to have interviews with them, and I engage with students and professors. And there's even a more kind of sad phenomena that takes place here, which is that the professors and the students themselves really do believe in the system. Most professors that you talk to really do have a deep-seated conviction that they are the enlightened, that they really understand the ideas that they're talking about. And I tell you, they don't. And this is why I say I lost faith, because it's not just politics, it's not just economics, it's also in philosophy. And it's also even in something like the hard sciences, even in mathematics and physics, believe it or not. That sounds crazy if you've not investigated any.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, so there are interpretations in the philosophy of mathematics, which, let's say there's plenty of room for skepticism that 99% of mathematicians are going to be completely oblivious of.
Are you telling me that 2 + 2 might not equal 4?
Certainly not. Although if you ask a mathematician in the right circumstance, they might say that, well, in certain cases, 2 + 2 might not equal 4. No, I think mathematics can be rescued from the mathematicians. But there are ways of thinking about math, especially when you get into advanced math, maybe not arithmetic, but advanced mathematics, where tons of metaphysical and philosophic assumptions are just taken for granted and they're not investigated, and so mathematicians are clueless about them. The same in physics, and advanced theories of physics, like we're talking about quantum physics. So this has really been a waking up process for me, where I'm realizing, oh my gosh, it's not just like the humanities that are subject to this kind of illusion of expertise and knowledge. It's even in the hard sciences.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I have like 20 different questions.
Sure.
Well, the first thing I was going to bring up is, it's interesting you talk about these straight A students and that sort of academics and everything. We had a very, very popular blogger by the name of Eric Barker on the show once. He'd written this article that sort of went viral because it was pretty controversial, essentially saying that valedictorians, this is why valedictorians aren't millionaires, or they don't make like a huge sort of like a dent in the universe. Mm-hmm. They're not really statistically the people to do that.
Right.
And it was all about essentially, what you're talking about. They're people that are very successful in academia or in the regular school setting, and a lot of them turn out to be great professors. They have, fulfilling or better than average careers and good families, but they're typically not people that sort of sally forth into the unknown. And wow, I just said sally forth. That's such a is that even a word that's used anymore?
It worked. I knew what you meant.
Venture forth into the unknown. They're not the people that sort of go from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel would say. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was interesting, something you said. I wanted to ask you a question about politics, but first I want to ask you this question. You're talking about these professors and how they feel like they're enlightened, but you're saying that there's all this sort of truth outside of academia, and like I didn't even know there was a philosophy of mathematics. Like, how can you get philosophical about mathematics? And obviously you've done it, and so I'm curious, what would you have those professors do then? Like, what should they do? What should one do to be more enlightened, I guess? And this might lead into what more your journey, what you've done. But I guess if one wants to actually be more enlightened and find truth, like what do they do? What should these professors be doing?
Okay, so I'll interject something before I answer the question. An interesting note about the philosophy of math. I love this topic. It's one of my favorites. I'll just give you a very quick example. The question, what is a number, might seem like it's silly speculation, but actually this is a metaphysical question. Meaning we're talking about the nature of things as they are. What is a number? Is it the case that a number is a concept? Is it an idea in our head? Is a number an object in the world? If so, does it take up space? If it is an object in the world, does it exist separate of our minds? And if so, is it in some other non-spatial realm? Now, this seems, again, like it's speculation, but actually, it directly impacts the math that you get. What math drops out of Platonic mathematics, the idea that numbers exist separate of our minds, is different than what drops out of finitist or an intuitionist mathematics. That says, well, math is kind of something that we do in our head. So So, and it goes very deep. The Platonism in math is this long-standing issue or topic that's been discussed for literally thousands of years. So, unfortunately, I'd say most mathematicians are totally clueless about it. And unfortunately, I'd say there's, from the conversations that I've had, I can't speak, of course, for every mathematician out there, I think it's largely hopeless to take a trained mathematician and sit them down and start talking philosophy with them. There are philosophers out there who are aware of the history of philosophy of math, but professional higher mathematics is totally institutionalized. It's totally sheltered from philosophical questions. It's all about calculation. It's all about proof. It's all about literally taking axioms that you start with and you don't really examine, and then you work with them and see what follows from them, rather than asking metaphysical questions about them. I had a conversation in New Zealand with a mathematician who got his PhD from Oxford, and we were talking about this topic. He actually reached out to me, and we were talking about this particular subject. He had a lot of good things to say, and he was saying, look, at the high level, Steve, mathematics is a pure game. Not in the sense that it's frivolous, but in the sense that it's kind of, we take arbitrary assumptions and we manipulate them in our mind. We see what follows from them, whether or not they're connected to truth whatsoever, and then we publish them. And then that's how the publishing world works in mathematics. So in terms of rescuing the system, I don't think there's much that really can be done. The advice that I would have to anybody, it doesn't matter if they're a mathematician, but if they're interested in anything, is you have to be skeptical. You have to be extremely skeptical and start doubting yourself. You have to doubt the professors. You have to doubt the textbooks. You have to say, does this make sense? Is this really well-founded? You have to discover a method for reasoning. And when you do that, there's a kind of a deconstruction process that takes place where you realize, okay, maybe I didn't know all the things that I thought I knew, and maybe the professors don't know all the things that I thought they knew. And then after you deconstruct and you find a methodology, you find a kind of way of reasoning, then you can kind of build up your structure of knowledge from there. And if you do that, which is something that I would recommend, it's something that I've done, you'll find that the structure of knowledge that you build looks very different than the structure of knowledge you thought you had, or the structure of knowledge that's kind of the orthodox way of thinking about all of these topics.
You're kind of blowing my mind right now. I love it because this is a part of the successful dropout philosophy. I mean, this is what we preach here, to question everything. And I bet most people haven't even thought about questioning what is a number exactly, instead of just assuming it's this thing that's what you said, sort of on a different level or a different tier than you are, and it's in this, to what exactly, is it? And it's that sort of habit of questioning some of the most basic and common assumptions in the status quo that I think really sets, well, in this example, a successful dropout apart from everybody else. Very, very interesting. I'll
just add one more thing on that. This is a process that is not encouraged in the academy. This is one of the reasons why I realized if I want to be in the world of ideas, it's got to be outside the academy. That's why I said at the beginning, you have to have a certain psychological disposition to go into the academy, because the idea that some guy with a BA in political science is going to be commenting about the metaphysics of mathematics and be claiming things not just in math but also in theories of quantum physics is ludicrous, and it's literally laughable to the academic mindset. But if you grasp the importance of methodology and of critical reasoning, and you kind of follow all this chain of reasoning, it's perfectly reasonable. It's actually more reasonable for people that aren't trained, that haven't gone through that process of, I think this is the way that you're supposed to think. These are the questions that you're allowed to ask. These are the people that you're allowed to listen to. When you're not exposed to that and it's not kind of ingrained in your head, then I think you're kind of naturally better at philosophy, because then you have more, you're more open to asking these kinds of questions. Like literally, I would encourage anybody to find their local mathematician and ask them questions like this. What exactly is a number? What does it mean to say that the number 7 exists? And they'll look at you like you have two heads. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, so we've had Zach Slayback on the show before, and I mentioned that he's the one that originally introduced me to you like a year ago, and finally we're making this happen. But I remember one of the things he did say on the show is we were talking about who should and who shouldn't go to college, and then obviously there's, at this point in time, like if you want to be a doctor, an engineer, do anything in STEM field, college is still probably a good option. But of course, you know, Zach was arguing for still that is not the best method, and there are other methods, and we might see those come to fruition in the next decade or so. But he was saying one thing that will always be true is that the person that is best suited for the college or academic experience are people that want to be academics for the rest of their lives, or professors and stuff like that, which I think should tell you something. Maybe it should tell you that college isn't the place to go where you can just like learn how to do anything you want in the world. Maybe it's one route to one kind of career and one kind of mindset that is best for those people that participate in academics. Yeah, because it's just so easy to fall. And I know people that are listening to the show who are in college. I've talked to you. I know that you know this. It's so easy to sort of fall into this trap, this box that academia and your professors and teachers and even peers can put you in. And it's so, you know, unless you sort of make this conscious decision to step off the conveyor belt, to take a leave of absence and explore for yourself and maybe do some introspection, it's very easy to sort of stay in this sort of pipeline, in this box you're put in. And there's a whole world out there, a whole different way of thinking of things, of doing things, of building things, and that's what we're talking about right now.
I want to comment on it. That's a very good point, and it's especially difficult in the world of ideas, I found, to break free of the notion that the only people doing serious intellectual work are in the academy. I remember I had a conversation years ago before I was doing this independent work. I was actually working at a nonprofit where this professor, who I actually respect his ideas, we have a pretty good relationship, was saying that nobody would turn down the incentive of working within the academy. Nobody, unless they're no good, they couldn't cut it, they couldn't make it in the academy, and that's why they would work outside the academy. And at the time I thought, well, that's nonsense. That actually, I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, but even then I was like, no, I could definitely see the case for people doing independent intellectual work outside the academy. But you have to realize, if you want to go that route, that there are huge social pressures for staying in the system. For one, you have a public stigma that if you're somebody doing independent research, that means you're crazy, that means you couldn't cut it in the academy, so automatically you have to overcome that bias. But two, you also have to realize that most of the time that your audience, your intended audience for intellectual content is going to be academics. So for me, I'm in this really weird circumstance, which I've only recently kind of resolved and understand, which is that I don't respect the system of the academy. I respect some individuals who are stuck within that system. Most of the individuals in the system I don't respect because I don't think they know what they're talking about. But it's still the case that when I write about the philosophy of mathematics, I realize that it's probably going to be the academics or really interested people who are going to read my work. So it's this really weird interplay. But I thought this was going to be a bigger problem than it is, though. Excuse me. Because what I found is, for example, I wrote years ago, I think it's still the most popular article I've written on my website, I'm not sure, close to it. It's called Quantum Physics and the Abuse of Reason. And it's about how I don't know if you've encountered this, but there's a lot of people out there who make really remarkable arguments about how the way the universe works. And they ultimately end up appealing to quantum physics. They go, oh, look, all this weird phenomena, quantum physics. It's so crazy and incomprehensible. The world's a big, giant paradox. So,
string theory, all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, what's this about? So I did the research, understood the actual claims in quantum physics versus what is represented by the people who are trying to argue that the world is paradoxical because of quantum physics. Anyway, it's a topic that this was one of the first, really, I think it's probably still one of the longest articles that I've written. This was years ago, so I didn't have much of a following then, and I didn't know whether or not anybody was going to read it. Like, who's going to read this, 4,500 word thing written by some guy, and is that going to happen? But I found it actually worked. it actually it was super viral. It's probably been seen maybe around 100,000 times, give or take. So
Dang.
it actually is the case that there is a market. There are eyes and all around the world who are willing and eager to consume content that's even about something that seems very out there, like interpretations of quantum physics.
Yeah. Well, dude, I mean, people love to follow the bold. I mean, if you look back in history of, all sort of these famous people that we look up to now that we think like, oh, they just knew what was going on back then. They understood what had to happen then and they did it. It was like, those were the people that were sort of ridiculed at the beginning, and people looked at them as weird and like, why the hell are you doing this, man?
Right.
But those were the people that sort of stepped out in boldness, that saw something when others didn't, and they were, usually people, if you look in their background, they had more of an unconventional background or something, maybe a relationship even in their life that contributed to them sort of being jolted awake from their current system or whatever status quo they were in at the time, and sort of stepping out even amongst the ridicule. Those are the people that we look back now with fondness, and like those were the sort of leaders of that generation. And
right.
So, what you're doing is probably well in line with that. I might regret this question. We can certainly cut it out of the podcast if we don't want to go here with this discussion, but I am curious, just because we are talking about questioning some of the most basic beliefs and systems that you've grown up with. One of those for me was Christianity. I grew up in a very Christian household, was surrounded by Christian friends, very, very involved with the church. I was a youth pastor for 2 years. It was a phenomenal experience. Like I didn't have a bad experience, unlike pretty much every single Catholic or anybody that went to Catholic school I've ever met. But I have gone through a very intense season of challenging some of those, to me, what they were some of the most basic beliefs that I grew up with. And it's been an interesting journey for me. So this is something I'm familiar with, that sort of journey. And you were talking about, metaphysics and questioning some of these most fundamental questions, including like the nature and concepts of being and existence and reality. I'm curious, like, do you have a journey to talk about there? I mean, are you a Christian? Like, do you believe in a God? We can certainly cut out most of this if we.
That's a great question.
But I'm very curious personally.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Christian evangelicalism. In fact, part of the reason, or the major reason that my parents decided to homeschool is because they really didn't like the curriculum that was being taught in their local elementary school or whatever. And so my mom was like, well, we want to teach them, we want to instill them with good Christian values, and so we're in homeschool. So I had a similar process. I grew up in Christianity, and I thought it was true, of course, because I didn't conceive of anything otherwise. And then I started to have some questions. I don't know, then probably I was 13 or something like that. And as I would ask questions, which I assumed had clear answers, like to people in the church, either my friends or my friends' parents or pastors, I was not satisfied by their answers. And so a little seed of doubt was planted. I thought, well, hang on a second. I mean, surely it's not the case that everybody in my social circle is wrong. Surely it's not the case that these ideas that my parents told me and everybody around me believes are true. Surely those aren't wrong. But sure enough, I discovered that I was not persuaded by ideas that they were persuaded by. I think one of the big seeds of doubt, if I remember correctly, let's see if I get this right. I think it was about just the methodology of faith in general. That I was saying, like, okay, so if we ask these questions and the response is where you're just supposed to have faith, which you just believe it and stop thinking about it. I remember thinking to myself, well, what if somebody believes, let's say, Islam, and they have the same methodology? They just believe because of faith, but we would say they're totally wrong. They would say we're totally wrong. Isn't that a problem? And you get really wonky answers like, oh, I don't know. Like, if you're really seeking, then you'll discover Christianity. And I go, well, they would say the same thing about Islam. If you're really seeking, you discover Islam. So there's lots of little holes like that when you start asking questions and seeking answers. I think there's a lot of people won't find the answers satisfactory. So then it got kind of warbly because I discovered, I guess, philosophy. I discovered critical reasoning, and I discovered the importance, like obsessed about the importance of truth. So truth is much more important than any set of conclusions. I think I want to know what is true, not just what feels good or whatever. Just that's the truth. So I discovered that, and I never fully shook a lot of some of the Christian convictions, like about the importance of love. I thought for a while that seems pretty important, or like in the Bible, all of like when Jesus, the red words in the Bible, like man, that
Beatitudes, Matthew 5, all that stuff. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. It's like that's pretty compelling stuff. I don't know. I'm not going to say it's true because it's in this book. It's true because it's in the Bible. I reject that.
Right.
But if you seek truth, that is not a good methodology for discovering truth. If truth is more important than a particular set of conclusions, you have to reject that type of methodology, because you could pick up any old book and say, in this book there is certain truth and I won't question it. You just can't do that. So I went to, this was actually, I had 2 years where this was actually kind of a defining experience for me. When I was in the process of asking these type of questions, have you heard of Summit Ministries?
It sounds so familiar, but I'm just going to say no. I can't
recall. So there's a group, I think they're based in Colorado, and they put on, I guess you could call it like a Christian apologetics seminar or something, like a worldview seminar. I went to it twice. Okay. The second one wasn't nearly as good as the first one. The first one was in Tennessee. I think I want to say around 17, give or take. But the way they presented it was brilliant. Can I swear on the show? I was about to just drop an F-bomb, but it was brilliant.
That's fine.
It was fucking brilliant. I loved it because what they did, they took all the students, and whoever organized it like this was a genius. They took the students who came from these Christian backgrounds, who really didn't understand the reasons for the beliefs, and it was a 2-week seminar. The first week was all deconstruction. It was all asking questions that I was delighted that they were asking, because nobody had proper answers to them. Like, oh, you guys believe this, but what about this? And they go, blah, 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 I don't know. And so by the end of 1 week, these students were like having existential crises, because they were like, I don't have, these have to be answered. It's got to be true or false. And either way, and I loved it. I was there, like, I was literally like giddy, because these guys get it. It was so interesting because this was a Christian apologetics seminar. So week 2 was then trying to answer the questions with their own conclusions within the light of Christianity. Some of their arguments I found compelling. Some of them I didn't find compelling. But there that really solidified this method of doubt. and they also did it in a wonderful way where you got exposure to all kinds of different areas of thought. So they said, this is kind of the worldview of Christianity. This is the worldview of secular humanism. This is the worldview of like nihilism. And I thought, okay, I see how all of these things interrelate. So that really put in my mind the importance of philosophy and worldview stuff. Okay, and then to abbreviate the rest of the story, I would say I would be like a very, like I agreed with Christian beliefs in a limited sense, just not for the reasons that Christians believed them. And then I had an experience back in 2011, which put me firmly into the theist, or I hesitate to say Christian because that word doesn't mean what people think it means, but let's just say theist camp. I had an experience of love where I fell in love with the woman who's now my wife, totally radically changed my worldview, expanded my metaphysics, and I thought, okay, this is God. This is what I'm going to call God, love, God's love. And so from there, that belief has not left. I do think that 99% of religious claims are wrong. They're wrong-headed for wrong reasons, but there is truth to be found in religion, and specifically when Christian love. I think that is the most important thing in the world is love. So again, that's a long-form answer to say, that's my current belief. And I think, of course, it's all logically defensible. I still place logic and truth far more than these conclusions. It might be the case that I'm wrong. It might be the case that I just had, I don't know, some weird hallucination, and maybe I didn't actually discover truth. If somebody can demonstrate logical problems in any argument, I will grant that there's going to be errors there. So it's not. There's no faith involved. I want it to be completely rational.
Yeah, I mean, maybe your significant other drugged you with some love potion or something like that. I mean, you never know. No, I love it, man. That whole story was great, and I can relate on so many different levels, because that your story is very similar to mine in that I grew up so close to Christianity, and I'm so grateful for it in a number of different ways. And there's still a lot of truth to it, I think, especially in like Matthew 5, some of the things Jesus says. But like, again, like you said, it's like I don't look at the Bible. That is not my go-to source of evidence for what I believe. I would never tell somebody like, oh, because it's in the Bible, because I just don't think that's that's a valid source. But obviously, I think there's a lot of truth, and this mindset has sort of carried with me, and I think with you too, from Christianity into like entrepreneurship and learning and education. Just essentially that I don't think I believe anymore that there is like a one size fits all with anything in life. With education, that's sort of what the whole educational system was built on, is sort of this cookie cutter system. We can put everybody in and we're going to, pump everybody out and produce sort of these, consistent results on a spectrum. And I just don't think that's the case. I think for everybody, if they truly want to live the best version of their life, it's not going to look like exactly like anyone else's.
Right.
It's not going to look like just sitting in the school system or any sort of religious system your entire life. Like it's gonna look different. It's gonna be different for every single person, and that that is sort of translated into faith and questioning these things. Yeah, it's so funny what you say about like Christianity and Islam. Like those were some of the most basic questions scary questions I'll add in, that I started asking myself. It's like, okay, well, if I grew up believing that if you don't accept Jesus into your heart, you're going to hell, then therefore I have to believe that like Gandhi and Mother Teresa are going to hell.
Right.
And it's like, that is just not an acceptable belief, much less a God that I would want to be in any way involved with. And if you believe that God created me and gave me my brain, I am very authentically and honestly using it to its full extent. And these are the kind of questions that are arising. And so it's like, if I'm going to be condemned in any way for this, why would I want to serve whatever entity that is? Like, these are some of the most basic questions that I was asking. And I would ask these, and some of my peers would be like they would freak out.
Yep.
It would scare them, and then they would scare me. And I eventually found that a lot of people don't want to ask these tough questions in religion, academia,
That's right.
in their careers, just in their personal lives or even relationships. They don't want to ask the tough questions because they're afraid of the answer, and that's something I have always tried to steer clear from. Like I'm the guy, I would rather take the red pill. I think it's the red pill. I'd rather know the truth, the ugly truth,
Right.
and be able to react and respond to that than just sort of live in this bliss. And I think that's something that really defines a successful dropout, is somebody who, and the members of our community, you guys listening, is somebody who is not afraid of the truth, whatever it may be. No matter how scary, it's more beautiful and more powerful in the long run than sort of just being, voluntarily blind to what could be going on around you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think so. You said so. There's this idea of kind of self-preservation when you're talking to your Christian friends in your youth, and they're scared by these questions. And here's the thing: they should be scared because it's the case that were they to ask the same questions, they would discover that their life is built on ideas that are not true, which is a terrifying prospect. But it is not. This is the thing that a lot of intellectuals, especially, will totally understand as applied to religion, but they don't apply it to academia and in philosophy. I think the exact same thing is going on. The reason, I would say, that most mathematicians are not really going to seriously entertain questions about the metaphysical status of numbers is because if they were to do so, they would discover that numbers do not exist separate of our minds. And if it's the case that numbers do not exist separate of our minds, there is a ton of higher mathematics that has to be revised. And I would say it's the same thing when you seriously entertain questions in politics and economics and all these areas. The established people, especially if they're in the established system of academia, they have a kind of self-preservation mechanism where they don't seriously entertain fundamental challenges to their belief system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love it, man. I gotta take a little break. Oh, good stuff. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about yourself now and what you're actually doing. So you have the Patterson and Pursuit podcast, which, admittedly, I have not listened to, but after now talking with you for just a couple minutes in the beginning of the show, I definitely want to go check that out. So you travel around. You say you've talked to professors at Harvard, Buddhist monks in Thailand and Japan. I guess, how often do you travel and just talk to intellectuals? Like, do you have, what is your job right now? I mean, how do you, like, what does a day in the life of Steve Patterson look like? From your bio, it seems like you're basically just sort of living the dream, questioning some of the most basic questions of humanity, talking to cool people and traveling around. I mean, is that kind of what you're doing? Or I guess talk a little bit more about Steve here.
Sure. So it's changed a little bit in the past few months. I'm just as of like 2 weeks ago, I've taken a break from the podcast because I got to work on some health things, and there's a big transition taking place because our travels now are done. So for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, something like that, my wife and I, we've traveled to more than 10 countries, and I've interviewed people from, Harvard, Oxford, Stanford, Berkeley, Cambridge, Columbia,
Cool.
all over the place, all over the world, and almost all of them in person. And I spoke to a priest, a Catholic priest in Panama, and Buddhist monks in multiple countries. So from my perspective, I was definitely living the dream. It was like a Socratic journey that I got to record and share with the world in the 21st century, where I got to have flights that were largely paid for through airline points. I paid down some of my student loan debt with credit cards, and I paid off the credit cards so that it made financial sense, and got a ton of airline points. So most of our travels actually were
hacking the system.
Exactly.
I like it. We've had a guest on the show that's talked all about that.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, so that part, I think I'm up to 77 or so episodes. So that was kind of the first set of episodes, is me talking about it, going around and having these conversations. That's actually just one part of what I've been doing. Really, I spend most of my time thinking, to be honest. I spend probably average, 3 or 4 hours every day of just thinking about these things, which I want to talk about later. Is this is really it's kind of a methodological superior system of being in the academy. I really did, let's make a mental note. I really want to come back to that. But okay. I spend a lot of time thinking, most of my time. I spend time writing, because I have to take the ideas that I learn and then create value for people. And so I do that by writing and speaking. I've got a couple of books. I've got audiobooks. I've got a Patreon page where people support the content I produce. I have a YouTube channel. I'm working right now on my first course for a writing course, because I've noticed. No way. Yeah, I've noticed on Coursera. I wanted to dabble and see if it was a platform that I have some friends that have used it and really liked it. But I've noticed that almost all the writing courses I saw were like how to write poetry and how to write rhetorical flourishes and how to write to impress people. And there was nothing on how to write to clearly communicate ideas, like how to write without bullshit. How to write and not waste your reader's time. So that's an area where, because I'm talking about philosophy, I'm talking about really difficult and abstract concepts. That's my thing, is taking those concepts and translating them into a language that everybody can understand. So that's something that I'm doing. So altogether, it's a lot of thinking and a lot of content production.
This is great, and I want you'll have to send me links to all this stuff. We'll put it in the show notes for this episode. I want people to be able to reach this stuff. Have you heard of? You're talking about communicating ideas and writing and stuff. Have you ever read anything by Derek Sivers, the founder of CD Baby, at all?
I have not.
Yeah, he's somebody that I think has done that really well. I've talked about him on the show before, but just maybe somebody worth checking out. He seems to he does an incredible job of communicating ideas very clearly and simply, like down to just he uses the least amount of words possible to communicate an idea. And so his blog posts are not ever like super long form or anything, but there's so much like substance packed into each. Definitely somebody worth checking out for maybe yourself and also people listening. So, I mean, you said come back to it, but we might as well just go into it now. You mentioned you wanted to make a mental note about just spending time thinking. Now, it's funny because we talk about the balance between thinking and doing on the show a lot, and sort of this ratio or this percentage between the two. I tend to, because I tend to be more on the thinking side of things. I will, whether it's a new business idea or something, regarding philosophy or something, I will definitely be tempted to think longer than actually putting some of that thinking into practice or use or something. So we talk about this a good balance is sort of 20% thinking, 80% action on any given day if you're building something. Now, obviously, your career is starting to revolve more around you're the guy that thinks about things and then puts them, writes about them and sort of blows people's minds. It sounds like, I mean, that's what you're doing to me. So, I guess you made a mental note. Let's go back to that. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. So this is something that I think is going to be adopted in the future by almost all future professional intellectuals. There's a methodological superiority to being an independent researcher that is grotesquely superior to being stuck within the system. So let me explain. When you are a professional academic, you have to deal with a lot of teaching. That's how you make money. You teach students who don't care. You have to deal with bureaucracy. You have to deal with academic bureaucracy. The work that you have to write is not necessarily what you want to write. You have to write what you can get published in a journal. You have to write in a way that nobody's going to read, which is the academic way of writing. You write something.
Sounds so miserable, dude.
It would be a curse, right? For those people, it's a curse that people think they have to accept because they don't think there's an alternative, right? So the idea of sitting around for several hours every single day and thinking through the ideas is incomprehensible to somebody that has that kind of job stuck in that system. Now, what's interesting is that this, I claim, leads towards a categorically superior method of reasoning. And let me give you an analogy. So I've been involved in the martial arts for about 15 years. And in martial arts, there are a bunch of different styles of the martial arts. You have hard styles, which deal with punches and kicks and doing impact damage. And you have softer styles like jiu-jitsu, which deal with joint locks and chokes and control stuff like that. Okay. So back prior to the 80s, really, there was a guy in Brazil named Helio Gracie who modified some Japanese jiu-jitsu techniques, and he created his own style that we know now today as Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And when Brazilian jiu-jitsu came on the scene, it destroyed everybody. The Gracies would invite, it was a whole family of them. They would invite people from all over the world.
So I mean, before you go forward, I know I wouldn't normally interrupt like this, but we have a yoga studio, and we're in Yakima, Washington here. Some of the Gracie family members just opened a jiu-jitsu place right across the street. They actually go to our studio. So we have like Gracie's as members of our studio. Wow, and I just realized like a month ago how awesome that was.
Yeah.
Had no idea who they are, but so I think I might take up jiu-jitsu just because of this. We're going to do like a strategic partnership or something. But anyways, continue. That was just a random.
That's awesome. Well, there's a lot of them. There was a huge family back in the day, and then all the kids seem to have a million kids too. So there are a lot of them out on the West Coast. That's really cool. But when they came on the scene, they would demonstrate over and over and over and over the methodological superiority of jiu-jitsu. They would beat the hard styles. They would beat the karate master who's been training for 30 years in a matter of a few minutes. Even some of their lesser students would destroy a lot of people who had inferior styles of martial arts. Now, part of the reason is because the techniques are superior, but here's how it's relevant to what we're talking about. In soft styles of the martial arts, you can train full speed. You can go 100% with your partner and not cause damage. So if you are going 100% and you're working with joint locks and chokes, the other person taps when the technique was effective, and there's no damage done, and you can start again. You can't do that with karate and Muay Thai and boxing because you feel full speed.
You can't punch somebody like 20 times in a row and expect them to want to keep going.
Exactly. And people, I mean, they do that, but then they can't train the next day, because their face is broken and they get brain damage. And so here's the thing: you can stay on the mat, meaning you can train a lot longer doing soft styles. So what happens is people who are specializing in hard styles are a little bit disconnected from reality because they don't really know if the techniques they're doing are going to work when you're going 100%, while the jiu-jitsu guys actually do know. So you take that kind of difference in methodology, apply it over a long period of time, and the level of superiority is just totally out of the ballpark compared to old styles of the martial arts. Now, this started to change because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has totally revolutionized the world of martial arts, and like everybody trains in it if you're a mixed martial arts practitioner. But the same thing I'm claiming is going on in the world of ideas. That when you're stuck in a classroom teaching students that don't care, and you're dealing with bureaucracy and dealing with publish or perish and writing terribly and not researching what you want to research, you can't develop a really high-level methodology of critical reasoning. You can't really dive into the ideas as much as you could when compared to somebody that has so much time and freedom to invest several hours every day researching exactly what they want to research, thinking about exactly the topics they want to think about, having access to the internet where they can have communication or research with anybody on planet Earth and have access to almost any book ever written since the beginning of time.
And people that are actually interested in what you have to say, and so you're getting real-time feedback too, like valuable feedback.
Exactly. The students, right, if you will, the people that are consuming your content are voluntarily consuming your content. They don't have some genetic requirement where they're stuck in the classroom and have to listen to you. And you don't have to grade their work. So I spend exactly 0 time grading these people's work, which means I get to spend more time honing my craft. So I think there are... The worldview that I'm trying to build looks very radical when it's compared to mainstream conclusions in lots of different areas of thought. But I don't claim this is because I'm some genius, that, oh my gosh, I'm just Einstein, everybody should listen to what I have to say. No, I'm saying that what I'm doing is actually it won't be seen as amazing 50 years from now. I have a method, not due to some super high IQ. I just have a superior method for learning and for working. It's way, way, way superior. And so when other intellectuals realize what is possible and they realize how advanced you can get, how in detail you can go, how much freedom you have when writing, I think that this is going to be the norm. I think I'm not exactly sure if everybody's going to be independent and have independent funding like I do, or if it's going to be some association of people. I'm not sure what the next system is going to look like, but I'm very confident in saying the old system that people are stuck in right now is not going to exist, in a few decades.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think your method is working, man. I mean, it's rare that I come across somebody, because, I mean, when you were introduced to me by Zach, it wasn't the first time I'd heard of you. It wasn't the first time I heard of your podcast. And then, of course, a couple more times I've heard of you throughout the year. I think your method is definitely working, because it's pretty rare that I like hear about somebody who's sort of known for thinking about these things. I don't know. I don't hear about very many professors out there. I feel like you might hear of them more if you're sort of in academic circles, but there's a lot less reach there. So I think what you're doing is definitely working, man. And I know we're coming close to the end of our time here, which is kind of a bummer because there's a lot more questions I want to ask you, so we might have to have you on the show again, maybe for one of the shorter Friday segments, so jog my memory about that, because I think that would be great. I do have 2 more questions that are more beneficial to our audience that I want to ask you,
Sure.
and hopefully you can shed some light on. I know you aren't a dropout, but you obviously have this mentality that is very compatible with the successful dropout philosophy. The first question is this: what parting advice do you have for any of our listeners who are thinking of dropping out of college, but they haven't quite made that step yet? Anybody who's listening?
So I can only speak with any kind of authority if those individuals are really interested in the world of ideas. If you want to be an entrepreneur and a businessman, I would still say the same thing. What are you doing wasting your time in the academy? But I don't have the experience to say anything more profound than other people have said on the topic. If it's the case that you find yourself interested in the world of ideas, really interested in the world of ideas, and motivated, maybe even obsessively so, then I would say be skeptical. If you're listening to this interview and you think maybe there's some meat to what I'm saying, then if you can go down the rabbit hole and you may find that the intellectual freedom that you thought was in the academy and probably have discovered is not, may be out there. You just have to do it yourself. So if you want to get to a really high level in terms of intellectual content and your understanding of the world, it's probably not going to come from wasting your time in class. The only thing that you'll be giving up is prestige. And you get, unquestionably, you get short-term prestige from having a degree, having a PhD, being some professor with a name. Undoubtedly, that is a benefit right now in the current market if you want to live in the world of ideas, but that's changing. And if you can create good enough content, if you create interesting content and you know how to communicate in an effective way, you definitely can, you can make a go at it.
Yeah, love it. My brother-in-law has his doctorates, and he would say the same thing for what he's doing right now. He's got to have it, but I know, and we've had him on the show before, if there was another way to get to where he is now without earning that degree, he definitely would have done it. So last question here, what parting advice do you have for any of our listeners who have already dropped out and who are already on, and let's say in your case, they're already on their sort of idea, like philosophical journey, their pursuit of those things?
I guess I would say a few things. One, expect nobody to read your work for a long time, because this is so, in terms of fields that have been revolutionized by the internet, the world of ideas, or I should say academia, is kind of late to the game. We still live in a very old legacy system, and it's hard to get people to take you seriously. Regardless of the quality of your content, it's going to be incredibly hard. And it's still something, I imagine my work is going to gain a lot of popularity for the rest of my career. But even then, I know that the biggest obstacle is going to be getting your foot in the door and saying, no, actually, I do. Yep. I don't have the credential, but I actually know more about this subject matter than people who do have the credential, which is hard for people to accept until you make the case for them. So you have to prep for that. So you have to prep for your blog not being read. Nobody cares about your podcast. Nobody cares about your YouTube video. But if you stick with it and you have you can say things in an interesting way and you're good at what you do, like I said before, it's something that eventually people will start listening. People will start paying attention. Yeah.
No, I think that's completely dead on. Nobody listened to Successful Dropout for like the first 9 months, except for a couple family members, and and so it's definitely just something you have to expect. And now, of course, people listen. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's definitely a healthy expectation. But obviously, I think consistency is an ingredient there that you have to make sure and factor for, because once people do start to catch on to what you are doing and saying, and they start to resonate with that and follow you, the next thing they are looking for is consistency. So I've seen people that start. And of course, I think if you're doing podcasts in sort of a seasonality thing, like I think you are, Brett Venat with School Sucks podcast does this too. But I've also seen people with other podcasts that they're not intentional about doing seasons or anything like that. They just get started, they'll do it for a few months, and then they stop, and they'll pick up 3 months from then without any explanation to the audience, and their numbers just tank. And I've seen that with bloggers too. So the next thing there is definitely the consistency once people do start, wanting to listen to you. But I think that's such a great point I sincerely hope that if you start putting out content, you blow up immediately, but more likely than not, it will take some time. It did for me.
Yep.
And so that's a great point. What is the best way for people to connect with you, Steve?
Well, you can go to steve-patterson.com, and I've got my About Me, I've got a link to my email, my Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, any of those.
Fantastic. Well, Successful Dropouts, you've been hanging out with Steve and Kylan today, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. For everything we talked about, head over to successfuldropout.com and type Steve into the search bar, and the show notes with everything we talked about today will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. For more information about how to drop out, grind, and succeed, go to successfuldropout.com. I also love questions. If you have a question about anything we talked about today, I want to hear from you. Go to successfuldropout.com and click the Ask Me a Question link at the top of the page.